Meta Church, how you guys doing? Yeah. I'm so glad to see you guys here. We are jumping into week 2 of our Triggered series, and this is the very reason that we're doing this, because oftentimes in our life, we end up becoming our own worst enemy. Maybe this song describes your life, where you're at, or maybe where you've been, a little bit too closely for comfort. And last week, we started talking about how to affect real, deep, long-lasting change in our lives. And what we saw is that we usually start with the wrong question. The question is not, what do I want to change? And this is what we do when we approach our resolutions. What do we want to be slightly different this year? What do we want to see shift? What do we want to change? That's a question about behavior. Where we have to start is, who do I want to become? This isn't a question of behavior. This is a question of identity. And what we saw last week is that if we can see it, then we have a real chance to be it. If we can get the picture of who God has called us to be, purposed us to be, and created us to become, then we can start the process of actually living out that life of purpose, significance, and meaning. With all that said, last week was really kind of foundational for where we're going in the series. If you weren't here, that's not a big deal. You can catch up on any of our digital platforms. You can go on our website, metachurch.tv. You can go on our YouTube page. You can download our app. And pretty soon, you're going to be able to listen to the sermons on podcast as well. So we've put some daily declarations in our life. We talked about seeing who God is really created us and destined us to become. And now we start taking the next steps of how our actions and behaviors in life start to line up with who we can see God making us. My message today is called Break the Cycle. Would you guys pray with me? God, we love you, and we're just always so humbled, and we're overwhelmed by your love for us. And I'm personally so grateful for Meta Church, a movement of people. God, it's not the building, it's not the organization that supports it, it's not this service. It's these lives, these unique lives, these stories that are being lived out. This is your church, and I'm so grateful that it's a safe place, a place where you can belong even before you believe, a place where anyone can come and can wrestle with these big questions of life. And God, as we seek to form our lives more into the person you created us to be, I ask that you would help us and you would guide us, that you would open our minds and open our hearts to whatever your Spirit is wanting to say to us. And God, that you would use so much more than just the words that are coming through the sound system, that you would take them and you'd use them and apply them uniquely to our life. And we love you and we thank you and we pray these things in Jesus' name. And everyone said together, amen. Amen. One of the most frustrating aspects of being a human is that we often get caught in these cycles. And to help you identify some of the cycles in your life, there's 2 questions that often we end up asking ourselves at some of our low points. And the first is, why do I do what I do? The things that you are doing in life that you're not happy with, you're not proud of, that you've been trying to change year after year after year, why do you do these things? Why do I do this? Have you ever been stuck in life and you're just like, why? Why do I keep repeating the same mistakes? Why do I keep dating the same people? Why do I keep going back to the same harmful patterns? Why do I do what I do? And the second question, which is equally as frustrating, is why don't I do what I want to do? Like, the right thing is out there. It's obvious. I know how I should be spending. I know how I should be eating. I know how I should be dating. I know how I should be treating my spouse. I know how I should be parenting. Why don't I do these things that I want to do? And so instead we get stuck in these vicious cycles, and we try and we read all the books and we listen to the TED Talks and then we go to friends and we get some accountability in our life, but we seem to be stuck in the cycles. And a cycle on steroid is an addiction. These things that it's like we hate ourselves for them, but we just can't get out of them. When you're really in an addiction, there's a few phrases that you'll find yourself using a lot. One of those is just one more. Just one more hit, just one more drink, just one more bite, just one more hookup, just one more browse, just one more. The other one is, this is the last. This is the last time. Man, when I was in active rebellion from God and I was just like sprinting away from Him as far as possible, I would find myself almost every time, because I knew God. And man, I had all this guilt and conviction in my life, and I would find myself going, drunk again, high again, like, God, this is the last one. This is the last time. This is the last party. And it's not. After the one more, there's gonna be one more. And after that one more, there's gonna be one more. And after that last time, there's another last time, and another last time. And it's a cycle, and we just can't seem to get out of it. And some of these are like the big bads and the addictions and the affairs. And some of them they seem a little more like benign, like they're not quite as scary, but we still find ourselves in them, and we don't know how to break out of these cycles. Back in January, at the beginning of the year, we put on Facebook, like, what are some good habits you're trying to get into? What are some bad habits you're trying to get out of? And we had all kinds of answers, things like procrastination and overspending, selfishness, time management, overeating, self-deprecation, just always constantly talking bad and thinking poorly of yourself. Things like anxiety and wanting to be more organized, and the same questions apply to every one of those. Why do I do what I do? Procrastination, like, here I am again in the 11th hour, right at the deadline. I've just been lost in YouTube for 3.5 weeks, and now here I am, and it's due, and it's final, and my job's riding on it, and why am I such a procrastinator? Why don't I do what I want to do? It's like, man, I'm drowning in debt. I'm overwhelmed. I've ruined my credit score. I'm hurting my future. I have no retirement. Like, why don't I do what I want to do? I want to save. I want to budget. I want to not feel like I have to buy crap to please people that don't really even matter to me, and we're stuck. And it can start to feel very hopeless. And what I'm wanting to do in this series is to start with the right question, which is, who am I becoming? And once we get that picture of who God's actually created us to be, when we see the picture, we can get in the process. But to understand the process, we have to understand habit. And the reason that we have to understand habit is because if you look into how our lives actually work and how behavior actually functions, what you'll find is that about 50% of what you do and what you think in life happens at the subconscious level. That means that half of your life is running on habit. Over the last couple of years, I've read some books that have really been transformational for me in my life. The first one, about 5-6 years ago, I read a book called The Power of Habit. I'm gonna let you know right now, I know not all of you are looking for heavenly extra credit and you don't take notes during my sermons, and that's fine, but this is a good one. And you can get out your phone and take some notes, because all of your phones have note functions on it, and I will just believe that you're not on Instagram. You can do that today. This is a great book. It's called The Power of Habit. If you're not a reader, it's on Audible. You can listen to it. It was really transformational. And then last year in 2019, the best book I read was called Atomic Habits. And this is by a guy named James Clear. And if you're gonna read these books, I would read this one first, The Power of Habit, and then I would read Atomic Habits. And these guys have really dug in, and they understand the behavioral science. And just so you know, I'm not just pulling things out of thin air. These guys have done decades and decades of research, and what the neurologists and psychologists and sociologists have found is that 50% of your life happens at a level that you're not aware of. Your life is being run by your habits, unless you think, oh, it's only half of my life. Even in your conscious life, the conscious decisions you make, which a lot of them I'm sure we're working really hard, and a lot of them maybe we're really proud of, and maybe you're progressing. But even at the conscious level, the decisions that we make on purpose, there are some things we're not really that proud of, and we consciously chose to cuss out somebody on the highway, and we didn't give prayer hand emoji, we had a different hand form. And it's like, there are still some things we're working on the conscious level, and there's things we're doing, and we're aware of them, and we're not proud of them. And you need to know these two areas, subconscious and conscious, they don't happen in a vacuum. And the conscious decisions that you're making are being influenced, impacted, and in some cases driven by the habits that have formed in your life. Our habits get us stuck in cycles. We're gonna attempt to understand that today. And that can be a really difficult truth, because if you don't understand it, you have very little chance of breaking free from it. But the great news is you're here today. And if you understand the habit cycle, you can break the habit cycle. And because it influences so much of your life on a practical level, if you can change your habits, you can see real change in your experience of life. We look in the Old Testament, the back of our Bibles, what we often call the Jewish scriptures, what we find is the Israelites, the Jewish people who were the chosen people of God. And all through the Old Testament, God was using Israel as the vehicle for his plan of redemption. This all came to fruition when Jesus Christ, our Savior, was born through the lineage of Israel, and he did everything he could to protect that. But if you read the Old Testament from Genesis to Malachi, what you'll find is that Israel consistently went through two different cycles. One was a cycle of blessing, and one was a cycle of judgment. And what would happen is they would really worship God, man, and they would be all about it, and they would realize that their identity, because you have to see it before you can be it, their identity is the chosen people of the God of creation. Yahweh, the God of the heavens and the earth, has chosen them, and they have a significant purpose. And they would live under this blessing, and they would worship God and give their lives to him, and then they would be distracted, and they would be tempted by the nations around them. They would lose who their identity is. They would think they're just another nation trying to grasp their way along, and so they would fall into sin. They would start worshiping the false gods of the other nations, and all of a sudden they would find themselves under judgment. And sometimes we think that judgment is like God with lightning bolts, and he's just waiting for you to screw up. It's actually a lot simpler than that. God created you. He instilled in you a purpose. And when we walk according to how God has asked us to walk, we live in our purpose, and we experience the blessing of the significant life we were created for. And when you walk contrary to God's will for your life, he gives you the freedom to do it. You can walk away from him. But you fall under the natural judgment of living your life apart from how your life was designed to live. Cycle of blessing, cycle of judgment. In the book of Judges, chapter 2, it says this: the Lord raised up judges who saved them, Israel, from the power of their marauders, but they did not listen to their judges. Instead, they prostituted themselves with other gods, bowing down to them. They quickly turned from the way of their fathers who had walked in obedience to the Lord's commands. They did not do as their fathers did. And whenever the Lord raised up a judge for the Israelites, the Lord was with him and saved the people from the power of their enemies while the judge was still alive. Cycle of blessing. And the Lord was moved to pity whenever they groaned because of those who were oppressing and afflicting them. And whenever the judge died, the Israelites would act even more corruptly than their fathers, following other gods to serve them and bow down and worship to them. And they did not turn from their evil practices or their obstinate ways. And throughout time, when you read the history of the Jewish people, God would send these different judges and prophets and priests, and sometimes even kings, and he would speak through them to the people of Israel. And what were they doing? They were pointing them back to their identity. You have to be able to see it. You're the people of God, a chosen vessel used to bring redemption to the world. And they would remind them of who they are and who God is, and they would escape this judgment and come back under the blessing, and the judge or the prophet or the priest would die, and they'd get distracted, and they'd go after the things of the world, and they would move back, and they would be stuck in these cycles, and on and on and on it would go. And it's like, how do we get this right? The chosen people of God couldn't get this right. How do we get this right? And the first thing that you need to know is that God has chosen his church, that we are now the vehicle to bring hope and redemption and salvation to the entire world. We find ourselves in the same place. And maybe you think, how could Israel, who saw the actual power of God, who saw miracles, who saw wonders, man, how could they go after something else? It's like, for those of you who are here and you've believed in Jesus, do you not realize that you have moved from eternal death to eternal life? Has God not given you hope? Has he not stepped into your life? We've seen the power of God, and still we stray, and still we get caught in these cycles. And yet Israel would be so far off, and they would call out to God, and he'd hear them, because he's just, but he's love. And maybe you're so far away, and there's been times in my life where I'm so far away, I'm so wrapped in all of these different cycles because I'm living under the judgment of just trying to turn my life away from God. And God hears you, and he wants to help you come back. Last week we talked about our identity. Israel would lose a sense of their identity. They'd get off course. We talked about getting a picture of who we are becoming, and today we take the next step. Our word for identity actually comes from two Latin words. They kind of merged them together, and that's where we get our sense of what it means to find our identity. The first Latin word is identitum, which means repeatedly. This is the Latin word for just over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. The second word is essentius, which means being. Here's a word, the ontological reality of who you are. The core of who you are in the inside, your soul and spirit, your being, your essence. These two words we get identity from. Identity literally means repeatedly being. The more you repeat an action, the more you repeat a behavior, the more you reinforce your identity. In other words, your habits become the proof of your identity. You don't just wake up someday and never had a drink in your life and start identifying yourself as an alcoholic. It starts with repeated behavior, with 1 drink and 5 drinks and as many drinks as it takes every day to numb you from whatever pain you're trying to escape. And pretty soon you're dependent on it. And it happened over time. And every single repeated behavior is reinforcing the identity that you are. You're an alcoholic. You need alcohol. It's how you survive. James Clear says it in a beautiful way in his book, Atomic Habits. He says, every action you take is a vote for the type of person that you wish to become. And this is why we have to see it first. If we can't see the picture, we can't line out the process. But once we see who we wish to become, then now we have something to line our actions up to in every action you take. It's a vote. It is not only telling the people around you, but more importantly, it is telling yourself, this is the person I am becoming. Last week we made some declarations over our life, and today we're gonna walk into applications, because if you can really change your habits, you can begin to see change in your life. Over the years, scientists have tried to take this very difficult concept of behavioral science and present it in a way where people like you and I can actually understand it. And what they came up with is something called the habit cycle. We're gonna kind of walk through this today. It's a 3-part cycle that if you can understand, you can start looking at the cycles that you're stuck in. If you can understand the cycle, you can break the cycle. If you can break the cycle, you can change your habits. If you can change your habits, you can begin to see change in your life. The habit cycle starts with a cue. The cue is what we're gonna spend the most time focused on in this series, because what the cue does is it triggers. It creates a trigger. And if you're not piecing it together, this series is called Triggered. We're gonna be looking at the cues, the triggers in your life. It triggers a craving in your brain. And once you have a craving in your brain is wired to do whatever it takes to satisfy that craving. Triggers are stimulus all around us, and most of our life is happening at a subconscious level, and most triggers are subconscious. They don't show up and knock on your door and say, hey, I'm a cue, I'm a trigger, I'm gonna create cravings in your life. They're gonna kind of take you just a little bit off center of where God has you headed, and pretty soon down the road, 5 years from now, your whole life is gonna be ruined. No, they're more sinister than that. It's all around us all of the time. And the beautiful thing about your brain is it's filtering 90% of the stimulus going into your mind right now so that you can hopefully focus on the 10% of what I'm saying. So it's happening at a subconscious level. Another author I really like, Jonah Berger, he wrote a whole book about triggers called Contagious. And there's this unbelievable study in there. He talked about how they did research, social science, and they took a grocery store here in America, just down the wine aisle, and they set up speakers. And what they would do is that one day they would play German music, and the next day they would play French music. And they just kept repeating it over and over. And they did it for a long time because they could not believe what they were seeing. They kept track of all the different wines that were sold. And again, this is subconscious. I don't know the last time you were in H-E-B that you were actively paying attention to the music. But at the subconscious level, people are hearing German music and they're hearing French music. And you might be thinking, I probably wouldn't even recognize German music. You probably don't speak German. I don't speak German. This was at a grocery store in America. However, even at a subconscious level, your mind is taking in information. And maybe you've seen a movie that takes place, part of it in Germany. Or maybe you've been at Oktoberfest. Maybe I've seen you there. I don't know. We're not gonna judge each other. It's fine. And maybe you've heard the German music going on in the background, and maybe you weren't paying attention consciously, but subconsciously it's all going in. And you probably don't speak French, and I don't speak French. Sometimes I'm driving and people have to excuse my French. That's different. So even if you played me a song and I couldn't tell you if it was French or not, on the subconscious level, we're storing memories. I don't know French, but I've seen Lady and the Tramp. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is the night. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I know that much. American grocery store, music playing, subconscious level. It was almost like magic. When they would play German sourced wines would radically outsell French sourced wines. when they would play French music, French source wines radically outsold German source. No one's consciously buying a different wine. It was so unbelievable that they just kept doing it. They kept doing it. Maybe it's just an outlier. Maybe it's not real every time. We're being triggered at a subconscious level. And this is the starting point. It's the entryway into the habit cycle. Your cue creates a craving, and maybe you're not even aware of it, but the cue triggers your routine. And routine is the next step of the habit cycle. Your routine is the actual habit. And so when I ask you, what are you doing in your life that you don't know why you're doing it, but it just keeps repeating, and you're sick and tired of it? And when I ask, what don't you do that you want to do? This is a routine that you see that could be healthy, but you're struggling to get it into your life. This is the action, the thought. The cue creates a craving, and the routine is how we try to solve it. This is often beyond our level of awareness. But the danger is when we try to make change, and when we start with the question of what do I want to change in my life, and what do I want to see different, and we just focus only on behavior, and we're not focusing on something deeper, and we're not looking at our identity, when we don't actually understand how behavior works, then we think it's just about routine, and we say, listen, I kind of eat too much, and we focus on the routine. And so we read another diet book, and we go on another seminar, and we sign up for Gold's Gym, only to spend a year's worth of membership and never go one time. Like, we're just looking at the routine. But that's not where it starts. It starts with a cue. It triggers our mind. It takes us to the routine, and the routine leads us to the reward. And the reward is the motivating factor of the whole process. It's the end result. It's what everything's building towards, and the cue creates a craving, and it triggers us to try to satisfy it. The routine is about actually obtaining the reward, and if the reward is powerful enough, it will do two things in our life. The first thing it will do is it will temporarily, and if you're taking notes, write that in all caps, it will temporarily satisfy your craving. If the reward is strong enough, it will temporarily satisfy your craving. The second thing it will do is it will close the cycle. You see, what happens is when we trigger a craving, we walk through a routine that actually brings a reward of satisfying the craving, then we begin to associate the reward with the trigger. And so often we look at someone who's struggling with overeating, and we think, man, this is simple. Stop eating so much. Like maybe if you stop eating, then you don't put as much in your body, and then over time you won't be quite as hungry, and you gotta eat breakfast, because you're not eating breakfast, and then you're not, sparking your metabolism, and if you'll just take this miracle pill, then all of a sudden you won't be so hungry. And we're trying to look at all the things that can affect the routine, but we're missing it because it's a cycle. And for a lot of people, the trigger for overeating isn't hunger, it's insecurity. And every single thing in your life feels out of control. And so maybe you've tried other routines to feel secure in your life, and they have fallen short. They haven't brought the reward. And you may not be able to control most things. Man, you're always on the chopping block in your job, and you don't know if your marriage is gonna work out, and your kids are rebellious, and everything's out of control. But you know what you can control? You can control food. And so you're insecure, and you try a new routine, and you eat. And you eat whatever you want, and you get the dopamine rush, and you get the sugar hit, and you get the sugar high, and all of a sudden it brings a reward because there's something you're in control of. And what's hard is that the cycle of habit only cares about immediate satisfaction. And so on the other side of your reward is a consequence. And you've overeaten because you're insecure, and now you have some control, and for a moment, you briefly feel secure because you were able to put your hands on something and actually make it do what you wanted it to do. But on the other side, you're miserable. And you're watching yourself become more and more unhealthy. And you have a doctor's visit, and they tell you if you don't make some changes, something bad's gonna happen. Something's in your future. Diabetes is coming, cancer is coming, something is coming, bypass is coming. Like something bad is gonna happen. Well, now what? The cycle's closed. Because all those realities do is make you more insecure. And now your lack of health is just one more thing outside of your control. And when your insecurity is triggered, the only thing that you know that works is eating. And so you go back to it. And now the reward of feeling secure is closed off to the trigger of feeling insecure and the routine of eating. And the cycle closes. And we don't know why we can't break free. If you're writing things down, you need to write down what is rewarded is repeated. What is rewarded is repeated. The reason that the cycle closes is because when your craving is rewarded, you will repeat it, and your mind will remember, and your mind will do whatever it takes to trigger you to get you back in the routine that brings it the temporary relief that it's searching for. Let me give a little bit more of a complex example where two people's habit cycles are in opposition to each other. And this is something that a lot of you in the room will instantly be able to identify with. And the theme of this is, parents, you have to tell your kids no. Let me tell you why. And I know so many of the parents in here are like, you're dang right you do, and all these other parents. No, it's you. It's you. You have to tell your kids no. And here's what happens. You're in Walmart, and your kid wants a toy, and you didn't come for a toy, and you're trying to do Dave Ramsey, and you got a budget, and you can't afford a toy. You came for Hamburger Helper. You're eating on the cheap. You used to eat steaks, but you got a budget now. You came for Hamburger Helper, and your kid wants a toy, and you tell them no. Your no is a trigger. And it triggers a routine in your child to have a nuclear meltdown in the middle of Walmart. And you think, what is up with this kid's behavior? Well, it's just a routine. And you said no, and it triggered the routine. And the routine is in desperate search of a reward. And kids' brains aren't all the way formed yet. They don't know what else to do. They can't talk through your budget with you and find wiggle room, you know what I'm saying? Like, they don't have those skills. So they have a meltdown. And now you're triggered. Because the meltdown is your trigger. And the kid has a craving. When you say no, their craving is to turn a no to yes. And their routine is to have a meltdown and have a tantrum. And their tantrum has now triggered you. And you are craving to just melt into the floor, to push your kid and run away and hope that they think that he belongs to whoever you push them to. Like, that's your whole goal. I just went out of this. I just went out of Walmart without anyone calling CPS on me. Like, that's it. So what's your routine? Because you're desperate to get out of the situation. And so often our routine is to say no, triggers our kid. They have a routine, they have a meltdown, triggers us. We went out of it. We just want relief. We just want to get out of Walmart without kicking our kid in the head. Don't judge me. You don't have a kid if you don't believe me right now. And so you're like, fine, can have the toy. And that's the routine. And they're pacified. They get what they want. They turn a no to a yes. You get what you want because your tiny terrorist has calmed down. And seemingly, you both leave happy. It's great. And hopefully you just wrote down, what is rewarded is repeated. And so for temporary relief, you have now closed the cycle for your kid. And now, the next time they want to change a no to a yes, they will escalate the routine that has already worked for them. And they will escalate it because they have found your breaking point. And your kids are smart little manipulators. And what they'll learn is maybe you can say no at home, but you can't do it in public. And so they'll just wait. They won't ask her things unless people are around. And they grow up to be adults who are entitled and believe they deserve everything. And if they don't get it, it blows their mind and they will throw a fit, thinking that the world will bend to their desires because what is rewarded is repeated. They've closed the loop and they found their identity as someone who can manipulate to get their way. It's very complex. And if we're only looking at routine, then we think we're good parents because we calmed down the situation, we said no, and then we said yes, but on the way to the cash register, we said, oh, why are you such a brat? You're such a brat all the time. What, you're too old? You're acting like a baby. And we think we've been good parents. And they're like, you know what? I might be a baby, but I'm a baby with a toy. You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't care. You're reinforcing negative behavior. They're a lot dumber than we give them credit for, and they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And it's all running on habits, and you're shaping them. And every action is a vote for the person your kid's becoming. And every cycle that we close in their life is one that they're gonna struggle to break free from when they get older. It's very difficult. And maybe you're like, I get that there's a reward, but there's also always a consequence. Like, if you're in the habit of drinking to the point of intoxication, you know very clearly that there are gonna be some wicked hangovers in the mornings. It's like, what about the consequence? Like you get it, like the drugs hit and you get that high, and that's certainly a reward. If it wasn't a reward, you wouldn't be doing it. But man, the shame on the other side of it. It's like, man, yeah, it's another hookup, you know? It's another affair, you got another little power trip. Man, on the other side of it, it's like there's real consequence. And where does that fit in? And you see, your habit cycle can't see past the immediate. And the reason that your consequence doesn't matter to the cycle is because consequence happens at the conscious level. And your subconscious drives you all the way to the temporary reward and then drops you off and lets you deal with the rest. Your subconscious doesn't care about your consequences. It is hardwired to deliver the immediate reward. You know, it's a beautiful thing that so much of our life is kind of on autopilot. It's a beautiful thing that so many things are automated and that so much of our life just runs. Like, if every day you had to actually consciously think about blinking so your eyes don't dry out, it would be really difficult to be as productive as you are right now. All kinds of things get automated in our life. The first time you moved into your house, you walked into a dark room and you had to look around. Is the switch on this side? Is the switch, is it high? Is it low? Maybe the second day that you walked in, you had to look one more time. Where was that switch? By the third day, it's automatic. Cue. It's dark. I want to see. Routine. Flip a light switch on. Reward. I can see. It's all the habit cycle, and it's all instantaneous. And if every single morning you woke up with a full bladder and forgot where the light switch was, you would be in trouble. Like, it's good that it's automated. But we also are in these deadly cycles. And some of you are like, I don't get it because I'm a good person. But somehow I'm in this cycle where I just keep abusing my prescription medicine. And I hate it. I hate myself for it. I hate that I do it. I hate the shame on the other side. I hate the guilt. It's just a cycle, you know? These cycles of addiction, these cycles of depression, these cycles of pornography, these cycles of just these sexual conquests or cycles of affair. It's like, if we don't understand the cycle, it can be almost impossible to break the cycle. If we can't break the cycle, we can't change our habits, and most of your life are running on habits. And so what do we look at? We look at our routine. We look at the thing we're not happy with, and I think it's time that we go deeper. And so here are some questions if you immediately come to mind. Like, the first question is, what are some unhealthy routines you have? These are the actual habits. These are the things that you're doing or the thoughts that you're thinking that are unhealthy, and you know it. When I keep saying the question, why do I do what I do? It comes to mind. Why don't I do what I want to do? It immediately comes to mind. And if you're going, I don't know, I mean, you know, I don't really have any bad habits. Ask your spouse. You know what I'm saying? They'll let you know. They'll inform you. Ask a friend that knows you. They'll let you know. You got some stuff. We're all jacked up. What are these unhealthy routines? And if we're honest, has that been the only thing we've been focused on? Slight alterations, slight shifts, read another book, go to another conference, watch another TED Talk, buy another inspirational tearaway calendar. It's like, man, I'll just take care of the routine. My guess is for most of us, it's not gonna take us long to think, to figure out our unhealthy routines. And to take it to the next level, you have to ask, what triggers you? What are the things that are triggering me in my life? Some of these cues, some of these triggers are mental, psychological. They're things like shame, guilt, stress, boredom. And these psychological things move us from craving to routine in search of reward. And you know, there's like a epidemic of pornography. And it's so easy to look at someone, which the statistics are overwhelming, and to go, they must just kind of be a pervert. You know, it's obviously lust. And it's very difficult in marriages when a pornography addiction comes out because, number one, men and women, the statistics aren't that different anymore. And it's the same thing, either spouse, like, what's the deal? Am I not good enough? Like, what's going on here? But our cues aren't always as obvious as they seem. And some people, when they get lonely, they get a craving for connection. And they have found that the routine of viewing pornography brings an immediate sense, almost like a simulation, a falsified version of connection. And it hits that immediate reward. The consequence comes, but your habit cycle isn't worried about your consequence. It's just trying to get you from craving to satisfaction. And so what happens on the other side of that loneliness? When you realize that it wasn't real, you're lonelier than when you started, and you've closed the cycle. And the reward of feeling connected is now triggered by the feelings of loneliness. And the routine that has worked and rewarded is repeated. It's more than asking, why am I stuck doing this? Why do I keep doing it? What is triggering you? This is what we're gonna talk about in depth for a few weeks. And so if you're going, I really don't know, and maybe it's at the subconscious level, like we're gonna give you some help over the next few weeks, and I hope you'll stick in with us with this series because this is huge. Triggers start the cycle. Maybe it happens at a certain time of the day, or maybe it happens at a certain place in your life, or maybe it happens at certain moments, or maybe it happens when you're around certain people. What are your triggers? And last, what's the reward that you're seeking? It's not always obvious. We're not always eating to feel full. Sometimes we're trying to eat away our shame. People aren't addicted to drugs because they're bad people. People are addicted to drugs because there is a craving that is created by something that's lacking in their life. If we can understand the cycle, we can break the cycle. If we can break the cycle, we can change our habits. And if you can change your habits, you can start seeing real change in your life. I want to go to the verses in Judges. We're going to put up the last couple verses we looked at. It says, whenever the Lord raised up a judge, the Lord was with them and saved the people. In verse 19, whenever the judge died, they would act even more corruptly than their fathers. What was their trigger? It wasn't what they could see. It wasn't their identity and who they were as children of God. It wasn't their desire to be in relationship and worship him. It wasn't all that he'd brought them through. It wasn't all the miracles around them. Their trigger was the judges. And so when the judge came, they were good. Cycle of blessing. When the judge would die, they would fall into judgment. What are your routines? What are your triggers? What reward are you living for? And if we can shine light on the subconscious parts of our life, if we can shine light and really see our habits for what they are, we can take action. We can identify the cues in our life. And you know what happened is Israel kept going, cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle. And sometimes you're at a place in your life where you're just simply stuck. And when they couldn't break the cycle, God broke into our world. And he made a way where there was no way. And if you can change your habits, you can change the experience of your life. But if you want true life change, if you want to do this not alone, just trying to search through your habits and search through the world, if you want to do this in the most powerful way possible, it starts with a belief and a relationship with Jesus who will help you see things in your life like you've never seen before. You can do this with the power of God inside of you, and it starts with knowing who Jesus is. You can unlock the purpose that God has for your life. What would it mean if you could begin to right some of the wrongs that you've caused in your life? You can break some chains that have been holding you back. You can change your habits, and you can see real change in your life. Would you guys pray with me? God, we love you, and this is our desire. I just believe with every fiber of my being that you have created us for a significant purpose. I believe it matters that every single person in this room, watching online, every single person we come into contact with, that they are on earth on purpose. It matters. It matters that we seek hard to follow after you. And so, God, I pray that we would just make room for your Spirit to guide us through this process, to illuminate things in our life. God, that you would help to bring real, meaningful, long-lasting change into our experience. God, we love you and we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for joining us today at MetaChurch Online. We would love to know how God is using this ministry to affect your life. If you have a story about how God has spoken to you through this online platform, we would love to hear about it. You can send an email to info@metachurch.tv. We would also love for you to partner with us financially to help us continue to expand what God is doing through Meta Church. You can do that very easily at metachurch.tv by clicking on the Give button. You can give a one-time donation, or you can set up to give recurringly and to continually support what God is doing. Every time you give, you invest in eternity. We hope to see you here next week.